one simple thing news organizations could do within their current rubric without changing a thing is to just make it crystal clear in every single story that they write about the Gaza war, whether it is talking about journalists or not, that number one, there's been 200 journalists killed in this conflict, and number two, Israel refuses to allow international journalists in to get this, to verify any of their outlandish claims. But to the advocacy question, that is also often a refrain from news organizations, that we don't engage in advocacy. And especially when this comes to press freedom, it's not actually true. News organizations have actually run some of the most effective advocacy campaigns that we've seen. I mean, so the most recent example would be the Wall Street Journal and the reporter who was imprisoned in Russia, Evan Gershkovich. The Wall Street Journal ran a sustained advocacy campaign on behalf of their reporter, not only making sure that they were constantly covering the case in the newspaper, but running social media campaigns. All of their journalists were wearing shirts or using hashtags, making sure to keep Evan's case alive in the public sphere. They were also pressuring the U.S. government behind the scenes to try to negotiate for Evan's release, and they were successful. Evan is now out of Russian prison and free. Journalists and news organizations engaged in probably the most effective civil disobedience campaign that we have seen since the civil rights movement in the 1970s and the 1980s, when state governments were attempting to subpoena journalists to uncover their sources and force them to testify in court. And what news organizations, or what journalists did with their news organizations backing, is refuse to comply with these subpoenas, and in many times ended up in jail. And what would happen in these cases, because they were so loudly protesting that these stories would be on the front page of the news and people would see that journalists are going to jail for doing their job, states across the country started passing journalist shield laws that essentially protected journalists from testifying against their sources, at least in state court. We still have no federal law, unfortunately. And so, news organizations can and do engage in advocacy on occasion, and when they decide to do it, they are actually very good at it. And so, of course, the mass killing of journalists, or the largest killing of journalists that we've seen in modern history, seems like a great place to start.